Hi there and welcome to Planet Zoo. So today I'm back in the Australian Sustainable Eco Zoo that I've been working on. It's basically an Australian outback kind of micro zoo, so we've only got the animals from the Australian pack in here, and I probably will call it done once they're all in. Now, I'm focusing on designing relatively realistic sustainable solutions in this zoo, so using sustainable build materials like renewable energy, of course, water and power conservation, natural light, and natural heating and ventilation, that sort of thing. Anyway, I've been working on this quite a bit for a week or two, so I wanted to give you an update where we're up to with this, since I've added the dingo habitat now. Now, the dingo is the first animal I've introduced to this zoo, and there's a few features here that keep the habitat sustainable. First off, because it's so big and you can't miss it, I want to show you this sun shader here. Now, I've created this using the same technique I used on this other main building over here, where you use pieces of wood to create shade, and it's called a louver when it's on a building. I'm not quite sure if it's the same name when it's not, but I honestly can't remember what you meant to call these things. I just know they exist. Now, the purpose of this is to throw shade over the water, because I know dingoes don't necessarily need to have a water feature in their habitat, but I thought it'd be a nice place to put one. And obviously, if you're going to have a zoo in the middle of a hot country like the desert, you're going to need to protect the water, so I try and avoid evaporation as much as possible, and that's why this big wooden shader is over here. I mean, it also looks nice, and it should draw guests over to this part of the park, but it's not just there to look pretty, it does have a function. So, how I've made this? It's made up of sustainable timber pieces, and the design is made up of two sections that are known as hyperbolic paraboloids. Now, in architecture, this is when straight materials are used to make a curved design. And I've gone with this because, for one, it's very functional. It's shading the pool quite efficiently. And secondly, well, in real life, structures like this are pretty easy to construct. There isn't an abundance of materials being used, it's just the panels of timber and sturdy metal supports. Now, this makes it a really efficient and sustainable build technique, whilst it's also acting as a design feature for the zoo too. I think there's going to be a few more of these type of structures with the other habitats when I get to them. But let me know what you think of this one, because it took me a fair chunk of time to get this right. The timber bit I had no problem with, that was pretty simple to pull together. But the metal supports that run through the timber, and I could have left them out, but then the pieces would have been floating. I did have a lot of trouble with those pieces, but I think I had to get them in there because without it, it would have just been weird floating pieces. Although I do have a couple of ideas for when I do another one of these, what might make that a little bit easier. We'll see. Anyway, let's move on. So another feature I've got back here is this double barrier. Now, I recently visited a real zoo, and if I'm totally honest, I spent most of my time there looking at the construction and layout of the enclosures. I spent more time doing that than I did watching the actual animals. So I noticed that in this real zoo, and I'm assuming it's the same for all of them, they use this double barrier feature quite often, and it was used throughout the zoo, not just with the dangerous animals, it was used with the ones that aren't dangerous as well. And it's probably a sensible idea because, kids, and I suppose even some adults, are gonna poke their fingers through and stuff, and even if the animal's not gonna bite them or something, that's probably a lawsuit waiting to happen. So I figured I want to do more of these barriers myself in my zoos. Now, this second fence in here, this is actually the first time I've used this natural caged rocks barrier, and I know zoos do use this quite a lot, and it's quite a sustainable material, so it's a good choice for a sustainable eco zoo because you're just using rubble and rocks from around the site. You're not bringing materials in. It also kind of makes up for the fact that I have had to use some concrete here with the water feature. You'll notice, however, that the water isn't very deep here, so it's not been a big pool to fill, and we won't be losing a lot of water each day from evaporation. It's just enough to keep the doggos entertained. So anyway, that's the big feature to lure people over to the habitat. Beyond this, I've raised the path so guests get a good 360-degree view across the enclosure. behind the path here, I've gone for more sheltering design. And again, that's a sustainable building technique to encourage natural ventilation. Now, I created the whole staff building area using this, and well, that was covered in the second video of this series, so feel free to go back and watch that one if you haven't already. Now, inside the enclosure, the hard shelter is made from the same materials the guest building is made from. So it's a concrete inner core with a louvered wood panelling on the outside. This protects the building from harsh sunlight and it keeps it naturally cooled inside. The materials on the inside, so we've got a wood chip floor here. Again, that's pretty sustainable for materials, and it'd also be nice and insulating for when it gets cold at night. Now, the concrete will also absorb some of the sun's heat during the day and it will retain that heat overnight. So our dingoes are going to benefit from reduced searing temperatures in the day, but with the added protection at night. Now, something I've got missing here that I think I might add later is a way to shutter up these windows though. I mean, they're great for the daytime, nice and breezy, but I think at night the dingoes would benefit from having these windows boarded up, so they're not losing as much heat. I think I'm going to have to look into that and get something into the next video that fixes that problem. But moving on, so the rock formation in the centre of the enclosure, now there isn't anything particularly fancy about this. I figured, you've got the fancy on the outside. Within the enclosure, you don't want to mess with the animal's natural habitat. You just want to give them the space that is what they're normally in. So I figured, the dingoes would probably appreciate the variety in the height, and it also gives a good sightline for people to focus on when they're viewing the enclosure as well from the back end there. The other feature I've got for this enclosure is the natural tunnel here. So if we pop over to the other side here, so as you can see, this is just another way to view the animals from another perspective. I played around with this tunnel quite a lot. An initial idea I had was to make this completely enclosed. So it would be completely covered and there wouldn't be views into the enclosure like this. It would be completely covered and it would just take you from one section of the zoo into the other. What I was going to do with that idea was have some Aboriginal art on the walls, like cave paintings. Now, I played around with that idea for a while, but I ditched it in favour of having something more open and light with views into the enclosure. I did also put some benches in here, but unfortunately you can't get them to face the enclosures, which I wanted to do. You can only have them facing the path, so I've had to make do with that. So that's the dingo habitat done. Next up, I'll be working on the kangaroo enclosure next door. Now, I think the space I've allocated here might be a little bit too big for this, so I might break this up with something else too. Something else I want to add, this section over here. Now, this is just a section of spare space with nothing actually going on in here. So what I want to do is to make this a little education zone. Get some benches set up and do a little stage or something and some information materials around on the walls. I think it could look quite good if I get it right. The only problem with that is it's going to be a non-functional space here. I don't want to mess with the path in here because it took me forever to get this all lined up. And as soon as I add path in to get people to walk into this, it's just going to mess all that up. So if I do it, it's going to be non-functional and just for show. Anyway, that's everything developed for this week. As per usual, let me know what you think of all this in the comments, and be sure to check out the next episode in this series next week. So thanks for watching, bye for now.